Okay, so this section is physiology, all right? And in this instance, this is the idea that the body leads the mind. Some areas of psychology will call this the bottom-up approach, basically, whereas the mind leading the body is the top-down approach. We're going to call it body leads the mind, all right? And this is really important. There are a number of very good therapists that the first thing they do when someone is feeling either depressed or anxious or in a kind of state that is causing them problems is to actually think about the physical side of things initially. That can include things like breathing patterns and actually how you move, how you stand, how you actually gesticulate or gesture, all of these different things which can then create a sense of confidence. Now this is actually a really, really fundamental thing in terms of a musician, and I want to show this in a number of different ways because this is, I think, very important to think about. The first thing I'm going to do is demonstrate a couple of kind of walks. The first one will be what I would call an anxious walk, and the only reason why I'm doing this, it's something that you should think about yourself. So as you're doing this, how would you actually sit or stand if you are anxious? Now it's quite difficult to do, but if you think of an anxious situation, and I will exaggerate this obviously, the first thing that's usually going to happen is shoulders tend to tense, and they do this quite naturally, okay? So shoulders tend to go up, the face tightens generally speaking. Now I've done this in lots and lots of groups where I've got people to replicate this kind of anxiety sort of walk across a stage, and it's usually the same system of patterns basically, and there's an obvious reason why, okay? So if I walked very anxiously, there's a number of things I might do. One of them is my movements will probably be a lot more rapid. It's very unlikely that someone that's very anxious is going to sort of languorously stroll across the stage. Generally speaking, what we've watched whenever we watch people performing from this perspective is they tend to rush very, very quickly. So if they are actually getting onto stage to perform, say they were a violinist, they will rattle the music stand, get the violin up there and start playing straight away. If someone is confident, everything is taken a lot slower, and there will be a pause before they actually start to play, and you can see even the breathing pattern itself has changed. So when we actually think physiologically about anxiety, one of the first things to do is to not get into a kind of anxious physical state, which includes the shoulders going up, quicker, rapid breathing, smaller kind of movements, and all of these kind of things, tightening of the face, tightening of the muscles. Now, if I think about the physiology of actual confidence, this is a really important point. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that everyone who gets on stage has to come on in this very, very sort of dramatic sort of manner that's extremely confident. You have to find, I think, the right style for you in terms of how you go onto your kind of performance space. But I would recommend that you become very aware, even if you're waiting to go on, about what your shoulders and your neck and various things are doing. Because if you can actually keep your shoulders back and you can actually slow your breathing down, which is a real key point. When anyone says, "Oh, just take a deep breath," this is completely correct. If you slow your breathing down, whether it's what we call box breathing, which is where you breathe in for 4, you hold the breath for 4, breathe out for 4, hold the breath for 4. There's triadic breathing, there's different types of breathing in kind of yoga practice. There's mindfulness breathing, breathing in through the nose, breathing out through the mouth, and actually being very aware of that, which often naturally slows the breathing patterns down. Any of these things start bringing the heart rate down, and of course that stops the kind of like the autonomic system, nervous system, flooding your body with the kind of adrenaline and the fight, flight, and freeze. So one of the things to try to start doing is slowing down your breathing and becoming very aware of that, and slowing down your movements. This is not always an easy thing to do, but it's something that you can actually practice. You can even sort of do this in a practice session where you purposely practice going onto stage and actually moving deliberately slowly and taking control of what you're doing. So these are some of the ideas around, or the initial ideas around physiology, is become aware of what your shoulders are doing, how you're getting tense, and if you can start relaxing your body and moving slower and breathing slower and actually moving more confidently, you start feeling confident because your brain is now being fooled into thinking that you are confident. This is this idea that often people say, which is act as if you are confident and you start to feel confident. Now, this is only, again, one part of the puzzle, which is why this doesn't always work for everyone. Just saying, oh, I'll just get on with it and sort of like look confident, well, that doesn't always work at all. But it is certainly one of the really crucial pieces of the puzzle. Okay, so just to recap what we've looked at in terms of physiology, one of the key ways of breaking the anxiety kind of pattern is to change physiology itself. If you are in more of an anxious state, if you become aware of this side of your physiology, your shoulders will tend to hunch up or tighten up, okay? Your facial features will tend to be tighter. You will do small and sometimes rapid movements. Now, this isn't always the case. Again, there are always exceptions to these rules, so I'm not making complete generalizations. Some people actually slow down when they get nervous, but a lot of people, it's actually speeding up. And this makes sense because the heart rate has sped up itself, so you tend to work within this kind of adrenaline-fueled kind of speed. You also will take a lot shallower breaths, which is why if you can just learn and practice on a regular basis, not just when you're about to go on to perform, but on a regular basis, some form of breathing exercise, whether it's mindfulness, some form of meditation thing, or even just sitting there for 5 minutes each day, just slowly breathing in and out. It's incredibly useful training because it all helps reduce this anxious state in your body and brings in the parasympathetic nervous system. We'll look at that in terms of what we call polyvagal theory in a little bit. Another interesting thing is that your vision becomes what we call foveal, or very, very focused. So when you are actually in a more expansive kind of confident state, generally speaking, your peripheral vision, that which allows you to see out this way to the sides, actually it will be expansive. When we actually get anxious, our vision tends to go into a kind of tunnel vision, and in cases of complete fear, where people are attacked, for example, their tunnel vision becomes very, very, very pronounced as well. But this is quite an interesting exercise. Peripheral vision itself, if you become aware of the peripheries of your vision, it can actually have an effect on your level of anxiety as well. You can do this exercise very easily by just actually looking at your fingers here and wiggling them and seeing where your peripheral vision actually is, and getting used to then holding that peripheral vision. It feels a bit odd because it feels like your eyes are technically doing this, but they're not. But this is actually quite a relaxing state for a lot of people, and they're not aware of the relationship of the eyes and this peripheral vision to anxiety. So all of this really amounts to feeling unsafe, okay? And if you can trick your mind and actually start moving in a confident manner, you can actually trick your body to an extent to feel safe. It's not, again, the absolute complete sort of way of handling anxiety, but it is a really important part of it. When we're confident, shoulders go back, and the first thing I'd always think about is your kind of neck and shoulders. Your facial muscles will relax. It's not always appropriate to smile, but if you can smile, that actually helps a lot. And interestingly, again, when I go through some of the techniques in terms of what we call vagus nerve exercises, strengthening your vagal tone, which we'll look at, one of the first things would be the kind of yawn, just actually fake yawning is a really, really good way of tricking your brain and bringing in the parasympathetic nervous system, which allows you again to rest, digest. Also, slower movements obviously are going to help relax the body and give it a sense of safety. Your gestures, again, if you're doing confidence, can become more expansive rather than retractive, because here what we're trying to do when we actually get anxious, this kind of exaggerated thing, is you're kind of protecting yourself and trying to make yourself as small as possible. This is again a survival instinct kicking in. The expansive thing is basically telling your body that you're actually safe and you're not at threat physically. Slower breathing pattern, as I've said, is really important, and peripheral vision is actually something that would happen naturally anyway. Again, this isn't always a useful thing. If you were a violinist in an orchestra looking at a score, then clearly your vision needs to be foveal. But where it actually goes into a kind of tunnel vision, that's different, and that is a kind of anxiety state. So this then culminates in this feeling of safety, okay, which is what we want to get to. So physiology is one of the first things. In the next section, I'm going to start looking at a few exercises we can do and some things that we consider in terms of physiology, which are really important in terms of handling anxiety. Okay, so alongside the basics of just changing your physiology into a more confident state, Here are some other solutions that relate to physiology itself. One of the, or two of the really most basic ones are this: nutrition. Now, I'm not suggesting, again, dietary things. I'm certainly not a doctor, and if you were doing things in terms of nutrition or supplements, then obviously this is something that you would need to talk to a doctor about. But I would say there's some very obvious things going on here in terms of nutrition. If you eat a healthy diet that is not full of sugar and is not full of caffeine and is not got excess alcohol or indeed nicotine if you're a smoker, then clearly your body is going to be in a lot less anxious state than if it is constantly buzzing with sugar and caffeine and various stimulants that cause anxiety. This is a fairly common sense thing. Now, it's not to say that you cut all these things out, but obviously a form of moderation is going to help. If you have spent the whole morning before a performance drinking cups of very, very strong coffee, your body is in a state of excitement and kind of buzzing, and this is not going to help the kind of slowing down of your nervous system in order to kind of perform. So you just have to be, I think, sensible about what sort of diet you use. Obviously, there are supplements and various kind of suggestions in terms of actually alleviating anxiety. Magnesium, for example, is a fairly renowned supplement that helps some people with anxiety. Similarly, things like chamomile tea, even bananas are actually very good. I point because there is banana right over there, which I'm about to eat. But there are a number of kind of like very good foods that help with anxiety. And this obviously depends entirely on what you can and can't eat and your particular dietary needs. But I would say there is a certain amount of common sense in, if you want to become less anxious, don't eat loads of food with sugar, don't drink lots of caffeine, and alcohol is another one which does raise anxiety levels when it's kind of moving out of your system. Obviously, there's a sense of relaxation when you drink it. I don't personally drink myself, but you know, it does have effects the morning after, definitely, which raise anxiety levels. Another one is exercise. Exercise is absolutely renowned for helping people with anxiety and a variety of other different conditions like depression. So regular forms of exercise, whether it's weight training, calisthenics, running, sports, football, whatever it is, doing that regularly immediately starts bringing down the anxiety levels that you naturally have in your body, and what we call strengthens the vagal tone. I talk about this because this is becoming a very, very big thing now on YouTube in terms of anxiety and handling anxiety. I've left there is a bibliography that you can reference for this online course. But one of the people that I think is very useful to look at who goes into this in depth is someone called Suki Baxter, who does all sorts of really useful exercises in terms of this and explaining in detail what we mean by kind of polyvagal theory. But fundamentally, the vagus nerve is a huge nerve that runs right down our body and is the thing that eventually triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, you can actually strengthen what's called your vagal tone, so the parasympathetic nervous system can actually kick in a lot easier if you do things like good nutrition, very slow breathing, forms of meditation regularly, mindfulness. There's something called the body scan, which is a really useful one in mindfulness. And again, there's a very, very good author called John Kabat-Zinn. I mean, there's all sorts of apps and things in mindfulness meditation, but just a good body scan where you just go through your entire body concentrating on each area is a really good way of getting used to learning how to relax and understand your body and the kind of feelings within it, instead of sort of seeing your body as this thing that just sort of does what it wants to do. Even the act of sitting with anxiety itself is a really useful thing. When you feel anxious, the first thing you tend to want to do is escape it. But this is a kind of there is a physiological element to anxiety. And actually, if you simply allow it to be and watch it where it is, locate where it is, I think this is a really useful exercise. There are various disciplines that look at the idea of just focusing in on the actual experience of anxiety. And what we know with this and any other emotions is they always kind of change and shift. So however bad it feels, if you watch it and allow it to do what it does, it will then eventually slowly evaporate. There are a number of kind of disciplines. There's a very good book called The Wisdom of Anxiety by Cheryl Poole, who takes you through a number of exercises in terms of this idea of sitting with the actual anxiety. In a number of different spiritual disciplines, Buddhism and Christianity, for example, there are a number of exercises. The welcoming prayer is an interesting one within contemplative Christianity exercises, but there are also agnostic kind of things that are not related to religion as well. Mindfulness, for example, taken out of the context of Buddhism, has a lot of things about sitting with the actual emotion. But simply put, when you feel it, actually just locate where it is and kind of watch what happens, rather than trying to fight the actual thing itself. Again, these are not things you want to be doing just before you're about to go onto stage. This is a kind of holistic thing that you should be doing on a regular basis to help strengthen. But there are some quick techniques that you can actually do as well that you can practice, and these all come from what are called polyvagal theory, some of the exercises that I've seen, and I've tried some of these and they are very effective. Slow breathing would be one of them anyway, because this actually triggers the idea that the body is safe. But the yawn, the fake yawn, which you can do fairly easily if you were sitting in an audience and just went, is a fairly, I don't think it's rude, and it kind of works because you've got to think about the context of where you might use this. But the yawn is quite a nice one. Actually tracking your finger around your fingers is another way of strengthening the vagal tone and actually allowing your body to start feeling relaxed. I wouldn't do this quickly, but you can do it very, very slowly. There's something called horse mouth, which is another way of strengthening the vagal tone, which is another exercise. Tapping fingers is another way. Massaging the ear, which I won't do for you, but Suki Baxter goes through a very, very detailed sort of way of actually massaging just inside your ear, which is another place where the vagus nerve is very, very strong. And also actually just massaging behind your ear is another area. Laughing, which again may not be appropriate if you're about to go on to do a performance, but just to kind of fake laugh is another way of doing this. And actually a low hum is another way. So these are all different exercises. And again, if you look on YouTube and you look at polyvagal exercises or vagus nerve exercises, you'll find all sorts of really good presentations. These are just a number of them. The thing I would say that's really important is you just pick one or two. The problem is being completely overwhelmed by too many exercises. The ones I use are breathing, that's it, and I like the yawn. That's fine for me. So if I do get nervous, and I was at a board meeting where I suddenly had to talk in front of a lot of very formal people, which has got nothing to do with the performance, and I felt the nerves kick in, I did actually do the fake yawn. It was actually very helpful, but I've done a lot of breathing exercises anyway, so it's all kind of like there, and just slow breathing and just making sure I'm not getting all tense are two things that triggers my mind to know that I'm kind of safe, and then I can just respond in that way.